over-the-air TV antennas. Hello, this is Jim from RV4x40.com. Welcome to the channel today. Our goal is to share some information with you about full-time RV living and things that we do and places we've been and seen and information like that. We hope you'll find it useful. Today I want to talk about over-the-air TV antennas, the OTA as it's commonly abbreviated. And over the years we've had different ones on our various RVs. We've had the traditional Winegard, what's called a batwing antenna. You see a lot of those around. They're on a little mast that cranks up, and then inside there's a little knob that you use to turn them around to rotate the antenna towards the TV signals. And the most common problem with those, I think, is besides maybe some mechanical issues with the raising mechanism where it gets a little bit stiff and needs lubrication, but is driving with them still up. And I know I did that once and took an antenna off, and I know at least one other time in a campground I was running through the campground trying to stop a guy driving off with his antenna up. So that's a real common problem with those. They work fairly well as far as all that is concerned. They do pick up TV stations. You can aim them in the direction of the antenna. After I took the antenna off that RV, I replaced it with what's called a jack antenna, which is a similar design in the sense it's a directional antenna, a little bit more modern design perhaps that. And it doesn't mount on the mast that goes up. It's designed to mount right directly to the roof, and it's only probably about 18 inches tall, so maybe a little bit less than that. So it doesn't provide that high profile area where you can knock it off. It's not much higher than anything else on the roof. So that worked well. I never had a chance to do an A-B comparison between the two antennas, but it roughly performed as well as the Winegard did. This coach behind me, we've had it since last November. And it came from the factory with an antenna on the roof, which was a directional antenna inside of a dome. And the antenna had a motor which would allow you to use a control from inside the coach to rotate it in different directions. I never felt the controls worked all that well and was never particularly happy with the performance. It did pick up stations and did allow us to change the direction, but it overall didn't perform that well. And then here recently it quit performing altogether. So I looked at the options for what to replace it with. I didn't have the hole through the roof. The traditional ones that have a mechanical control inside of the coach weren't going to work. And so I looked at the options, and I found two really, both from Winegard, one of which was another motorized directional antenna that went on the roof. And I looked at the price tag, and it was just shy of $400. So that wasn't terribly attractive to me at that point. So I looked at another option, which is a kind of omnidirectional antenna. It's still a big dome kind of affair that goes on the roof, but inside of it is just an array of antenna elements that are designed to pick up signals from 360 degrees, and that was about $90. So being the fact that we really don't watch all that much TV, and especially if we're in places where we don't have it, we don't even really worry about it too much. So I decided to go with the less expensive solution, recognizing it's not directional. You can't point it at a TV station, so it probably isn't going to pick up signals from quite as far away or quite as well as one of the more directional antennas. But given that when we watch TV, it's somewhat rare anyway, so I wasn't too worried about that. So the video today is going to take you through the steps of removing that old antenna and putting the new one in place. It may not be applicable in some cases because you haven't got the same antenna on your roof, but the installation for the new one is about the same. And we'll kind of go through that whole process and then give you some results at the end. Stay tuned for some details. We're going to start by showing you the contents of the box as it comes from Winegard. And then we'll also show you some of the tools that we're going to need as we go through this process. As you can see, it's a flat dome and just basically is going to sit on the roof much like it's sitting on the table right now. And it's a Winegard Air 360. It is a non-directional antenna or omnidirectional antenna. And no omnidirectional antenna is ever going to pick up signal as well as a directional antenna will. There's a saying in antennas that an omnidirectional antenna works equally poorly in all directions. Not necessarily true, but it is something to keep in mind. This shows you the inside of the antenna. You can see the various elements there arranged in a circle so that they pick up pretty well equally well in all directions. They don't have to rotate the antenna. In the bottom of the picture you'll see an AM/FM antenna. The problem in my installation is I only have one coax coming down, and this takes a second coax if you want to use that antenna, so not useful for us. The ring around the bottom of the antenna is butyl tape, which I have already applied to the bottom of the antenna. It's covered with paper that will get pulled off right before we stick the antenna down to the roof. This is done to add as a water seal around the edge of the antenna. In addition to the antenna, there's a control switch showing up there beside the antenna. This is designed to turn on power either to the antenna, it's an amplifier inside of it which takes power, or to switch your signals over to cable if you have that coming into the coach. We already had that switch installed, and we'll show you a picture of that in a minute, so we're not going to use this, but it comes with the kit. Since they've assumed this is a new installation, you're also given a 25-foot length of pretty good quality RG6 coax, which you'd want to run from the antenna down into your coach. In our case, we'll reuse the cable which is already there. There are some screws and additional adapter for the AM/FM antenna if you use that into a car radio, and we aren't going to use any of that, so we'll ignore that for now. And we're going to need an electric drill to drive the screws into the edge of the antenna as we mount it to the roof. We're definitely going to need a good putty knife to scrape away the caulk that's around the existing antenna. And we're going to need some butyl tape, which I've already attached to the antenna. And no roof job would be complete without having plenty of Dicor self-leveling sealant to use around the screw heads and make sure everything is tight. And then I like to use an electric caulk gun. It makes putting the stuff down a lot easier. So we're going to take all that with us to the roof. And we'll take my toolbox up because I'm sure there'll be some small tools we'll need in taking everything apart that I haven't thought about. This is the existing antenna. It is a circular thing sitting up on some feet that keep it off the roof. Inside of that is a directional antenna and a motor system that rotates it around. Not obvious, but there's two wires coming up through the roof, one of which is a coax, the other which is the power and control wires to the antenna. With the new system, it must sit over the entry-exit hole, whatever you want to call it, but the hole through the roof must be inside of the dome. So will be a little bit of a challenge just to make sure we get this new antenna put back there and get everything cleared up so that the hole in the roof is underneath of the antenna. The next thing we're going to have to do is peel off all of this caulk. Give Tiffin credit, they put a lot of caulk down, maybe more than is necessary because there's no real reason to have it between the feet, but that's what they put down. So we're not going to bore you with how long this took, but probably the hardest part of this whole task was getting all that caulk out of the way so I could get the mounting screws out of the feet and remove that old antenna and then cleaning everything up. So we'll kind of transition over to the next item here. Well, it's certainly a messy job and takes a lot of time and patience to get this stuff scraped off and out of the way. But once you get it out of the way, then you can remove the screws. There are 4 different screws involved in there, and those have to be pulled out. There will still be some adhesion for the caulk that's left, but you can then gently pry the feet loose from the roof. Well, we did get the antenna off. It's now laying on its top, and you can see we pulled caulk out from a couple different places, had to get a lot of screws out. And there's still a wire connected to the antenna, actually 2 wires connected to the antenna that have to be disconnected, and it'll be ready to go off the roof. Well, all of the caulk has been removed at this point. You can still see some places where the screw holes were and a slightly different color of the roof where we removed the caulk, and the wires have been freed up. There are 2 of them, as I mentioned, one of which is a control wire for the old antenna. It'll actually just be cut off and allowed to dangle there on the inside. And we do have to put the new antenna back close to the vent because that's where the wires exit through the roof, and we have to cover that up with the antenna. So we're just going to do a bit of a trial fit here to make sure everything fits. I'm not sure exactly why, but the antenna is marked with a front-back set of markings. It can go in either 180 degrees out, but apparently they do want it oriented along the line of the coach for whatever reason. So that's lined up. Everything seems to fit okay. We'll need to connect the cable to the antenna and then install it to the roof. The first thing we're going to have to do is connect that coax up to the antenna. If you had to do that, it would be really rather disastrous. And so the camera isn't going to catch a lot of this, but we're going to hook the coax up, and then the butyl tape has a paper lining on it, so that has to be removed, and clear that all the way around. Once that's done, we'll be ready to actually put the antenna into its final position. So we'll place the antenna down, rotate it around to make sure we get it oriented pretty much along the axis of the coach. Go ahead and push it down. The butyl tape will pretty much keep it from moving anywhere. And then next we're going to have to go take the screws and screw those into, not over tighten it, I warn you about that, don't break the edge of the lip, but get them tight enough where it's not going to go anywhere. And I did it until I saw a little bit of the butyl tape oozing out at each of the screw locations. Make sure there was a fair amount of compression onto that tape. Certainly one of the most important steps when you're doing something like this on the roof is to make absolutely certain you have got everything thoroughly caulked. Tiffin did a good job of that on the existing antenna, and so we need to make sure we cover the screw heads separately, and we go around and do all the screw heads, make sure they have a good solid coat over the top of them, a cap to keep water from getting inside of the screw, and then we'll come back out and run a bead around the outside. And in our case, I like to and you might just as well go ahead and use up all the caulk, so I actually added a lot more caulk around the outside than I might have needed to, but by the time it's all done, it's going to be thoroughly caulked and hopefully very waterproof, watertight. The last thing we want is a leak from this installation coming in through the roof. Because the dome doesn't cover up all the screws that were removed from the old antenna, we want to make sure we go back and give a very good dose of caulk into and on top of those screw holes so that they can't leak with time. The last thing, again, you want to have is a leak somewhere that gets water into the roof and the ceiling. That can be catastrophic to an RV. And because there was caulk left over, I don't want to throw it away, so we'll go back and do one final dose around the outside edge just to add a little bit of extra protection before we call it a day. The last thing we have to do deals with something inside one of the cabinets in the RV. The panel you see on the right-hand side of the picture is the control for the antenna. It kind of controlled how it rotated. It was not a very well done from a human factor standpoint, not to mention the fact the antenna didn't work all that well either. However, one of the things I found out was that when I tried to program the TV set with the system hooked up and turned on, but that box disconnected, it would not work. And so it turns out that in addition to being the control box, there is an amplifier that's in that particular control head. And that amplifier was blocking the 12-volt signal that needs to go up to the antenna for its amplifier to work. So the last thing I did was to take that apart and remove that cable, disconnect that actual control head. It's still there because it would be a blank hole if I took it out, but hook the wire from the antenna directly into the control panel, which is already there. Well, thanks for watching today. Overall, we're pleased with the results. It may not pull in quite as few distant signals where we're located, which is north of Austin, Texas, and we're far enough north that with a really good antenna we can pick up Waco stations. There's 3 or 4 of them up there, as well as the Austin metro stations. With this antenna, I can only pick up one of those signals, the one that's the furthest south and where their antenna is located. But since those are duplicates as far as networks are concerned with the Austin stations, it really isn't a big deal. So it does work, no problems other than what we described in getting it set up as we went through the video. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed, we'd appreciate it if you would click on the subscribe button down below and subscribe to our channel. Then click on the bell icon. You'll be notified when we post a new video. So we're going to take off and do some more traveling and some more videos. Stay tuned for that. Come back next week. And we hope you're having a great day, and we'll be traveling the highways and byways of America and hope to see you somewhere. That's one where you turn it on to use the antenna. Turn it off, it'll turn the connection over to the cable TV inlet on the back of the RV. So with that corrected, we get about 40 channels on the TV set now with it scanned from everything. That's about what we had before when the antenna would work. So it's roughly equivalent to what we had before without the complexity.